Afternoon to everybody. Welcome, everyone. Today,
Good
as
morning,
my
good
colleague was
morning, good
mentioning,
afternoon.
uh,
I am so
today,
sorry. I am so
yes.
sorry, Gonzalo. I forgot to mute everybody else. And let me unmute you to avoid background noise, which is usually very annoying. And there we go. All
Okay.
right.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
very welcome.
Okay, today, as my colleague was just advancing, we are going to be looking at the United Nations system. Okay, very important, the point of system. Yes, we are going to cover some legal aspect, but mainly the perspective and the approach will be from the international relations field, okay, international relations studies. That's very important in terms that, of course, we can approach and we can cover this topic from different perspectives, but mainly today we are going to cover from that view. That's very important to keep in mind, okay? And in the terms of the United Nations systems, of course, it's huge, humongous, as my colleague was mentioning, but it's very important to be clear that we are going to focus on the specialized agencies, and I want specifically you have a general concept and a general view of the diagram, okay? The purpose, the way they create it, and mainly the scope of the United Nations system. According to that, the idea is to make contact and to understand this diagram, okay? That has been structured over the years to deal with the different topics and issues, the global framework, okay? Of course, we have global challenges, we have global situation, coordination, cooperation, different international aspects, and according to that, international events, we need to have a global approach, because just only national approach or from the different nations or foreign affairs wasn't enough, okay? So considering that, it's important that specialized agencies, the specialized is so much important, very important emphasis, because these areas of specializations and challenges, of course, have proliferated in the last years. So according to that, we need to consider the importance of the specialized agencies. So it's important to ask first, how is the international community instrumentalized and materialized at the institutional level? Because we tend to speak about, okay, global, the world, the international relations, okay, international aspects, foreign affairs, but how indeed the international community works, okay, is instrumental to the different aspects, the values, the core, and the means of that. Of course, all of us think immediately about the United Nations, but United Nations itself is not alone. Okay, we have more aspects, more organization and entities that are part of it, and also some others that are not in the UN. So considering that, a relevant issue to understand, first of all, is that the international relation nowadays of the last decade also is how the international community is instrumentalized and materialized. When we think about globally, when we think about the world, the regions, different scales, different levels, okay, in terms of territory or different nations, it's very important to think the institutions that represent that. That's what I tend to call the common forums, okay? Very important, that aspect. This is always a complex issue, okay, to cover the world. And of course, according to the challenges, according to the different contexts, the these require a very specific design. That's what I call the diagram, okay? That's called the international diagram, and it's important to keep that in mind to understand this scope. Although today, the idea is to approach it, okay? To cover this diagram, to have an idea how the United Nations system works and is part of it, okay? And of everybody, this is not just very high or very complicated aspect, of course, but it's part of our life in it also. Okay, the first thing to keep in mind is that after the Second World War, we have a redesign of international relations because before the war we don't have a lot of multilateralism. So after that, of course, the creation of the United Nations, the different agreements, the redefinition of the economy, Bretton Woods, okay, the Charter of San Francisco, etc., of course, created the and based the international relations in interdependence, multilateralism, cooperation, and of course coordinations. We don't have only one authority above all. It's not hierarchy, it's about peers, coordination, as the international public law stipulates, okay, or makes this position about it. So to design a proposed world, which is usually assimilated to the idea of international community, also global governance, we have different concepts. It's very important that this design have to be adapted, adjusted to these characteristics, these features. So according to that, we know that the contemporary international community exhibits other characteristics. It's not only that original ones. Also, nowadays we have a new scenario, which is multi-stakeholders. We have new actors, new subjects that are very relevant, like NGOs, like private sector or multinational enterprises, and of course, even the persons. Okay, in the classic view, wasn't part of it, but nowadays the individuals are part of the international relations. So also the multifactorial and different vectors that are very important to the configuration of the international relations and of course the international community. Nowadays, we speak about cybersecurity, we speak about environment, we speak about different topics that are very important and very crucial. And according to that, we have a redefinition, redisposition of the scope, of course, of the international community. So, according to that, is not just anymore the classical model, which is expressed in just states and international organizations, is more than that. So, a crucial aspect, of course, was to understand the dynamics, the interactions, the degree, different forums, different new entities, the international organization, that implies a challenge in itself. Because how we make, for example, we work for the health, and also my country is worried about the trade and also about the economy and finances. So different topics, very hard to cover all of them by only one organization or only one perspective. So considering that, we have a long period of proliferation of new and new and new entities or agencies. So according to that, it's very important the dynamic, the interactions, in the degree of human evolution or even the development imply a challenge. And how they coordinate all of that? Well, we have seen these today's global challenges, the wars, the hybrid wars, commercial wars, okay? So we have a lot of challenge. So to go specifically, to be very able to cover, to counter, manage a global challenge requires a lot of specialization, technique, and of course, knowledge of the highest level. So, according to that, it couldn't be covered for just one organization. We requires multiply a lot of a sort of plural and collective uh, variety and diversity of organizations. So, considering that the international coordination scheme is characterized by the idea of diversification and specializations. Diversification tends to be covered, okay, well, we have a bunch of them, regional, or even we have, in other cases, um, regional, local, international. Yes, of course, we have a lot of international organization, but the most important part in that aspect is the coordination of them and how they got some of the international law principles. That's very important. So, diplomacy, international cooperation, coordination in international forums and summits as a space of generating the intellect of international community were precisely and characterized by a process of plurality at different scales. So, this does not cease the transverse and, of course, some of the criticism that we mentioned before in the previous classes, but previous schemes and logics of international relations, such as levels of influence, gravitation, geopolitics, globalization models, and of course, some structural shortcomings, some hierarchies in terms of power, economical power, political power, um, war power, okay, among other criticism of the diagram. So this diagram wasn't, this scheme is not perfect for sure. Even we started these classes with some of the criticism above them, because of course the reality shows a deep crisis of the model of international relations. But despite that, it's very important to understand that it's not just okay, now I know the World Health Organizations, let's study isolated the UNICEF, let's study isolated. No, this is a diagram, they are interconnected. Okay, so we need to understand these um, mechanisms and how they are instrumental to the and even materialized the international community. So according to that, it's very important that this lecture, this class is so related and so combined with the previous class of some critical approach over the international organizations model. So, to focus more in the United Nations system, it's important to bear in mind that United Nations is not all the international organizations. We have a lot of international organizations that are not part of the United Nations. So we are going to focus, because time and because they are a lot, so we are going to focus on the United Nations system, okay? And which the normal way to call them is specialized agencies. Again, the importance of specializations. It's not a centralized approach. It's not, okay, United Nations cover all the topics, do everything. No. The point is, okay, different agencies diversify the approaches, the focus, the purposes, okay, and the means, and considering that the goals, the objectives, and considering that all together in interagency work. Of course, in general, coordinated or being part of the common bodies of the United Nations. So, this system is also called just the United Nations system for short. It refers a set of agencies, organizations, programs, autonomous entities, among others, that we are going to cover in the classifications, that collaborate with or even belong the United Nations to address various aspects, okay? Some of those global challenges, international aspect, peace, security, health, among others. Okay, so considering that, it's very important some of certain issues or matters like, well, health, education, culture, food, work, economics, labor. So what are those? Well, of course, there are, of course, in general, and almost all of them are human rights. And because of that, is so much important in the international law, because those are human rights and those have to be promoted, guaranteed, and according to that, the international governance, the global governance, and specifically the United Nations has to guarantee, has to work on that as a purpose, okay, a motivation to and an aim to cover these topics, to protect them, to guarantee them, okay. So we have as a essential article of the United Nations system how actually this is already covered in a legal way, is a disposition, is the Article 15.7 of the Charter of the United Nations, which provide basically the legal basis, okay, for the design of this cooperation and coordination diagram, okay, based on the specialization. So, in the first disposition, we can see the various specialized agencies established by intergovernmental agreement and having wide international responsibilities. It's not just a right, it's also a responsibility. They have to commit to that. Okay, it's a must as defining their basic instruments in economic, social, cultural, educational, health, and related fields. Related fields is an open enumeration. Okay, so it's not only those mentioned, it could be any other that is considered a very important and relevant issue or matter in the international approach in the international community. So, shall be brought into relationship with the United Nations in accordance with the provisions of the Article 63. This is how international community, international organization is part of and could be actually an agency and related organization with the United Nations. Such agencies thus brought into relationship with the United Nations are hereinafter referred as specialized agencies. Because of that, the full title, United Nations System of Specialized Agencies. Okay, so of course, this aspect is quite important. Article 57, Article 59 also has a very important disposition, which is even empowers the creation of the specialized agencies. So it's not was okay in in 1945, we have the creation of the United Nations. They created some other international organizations that are related to the United Nations, and that's it. No, this is in evolving, it's developing, okay, according to new realities, new context. Nowadays, it's quite different than 50, 60, or 70 years ago. So considering that, they also leave the open door to create new specialized agencies, leaving exactly the mechanism of international configuration and reorganization open to adjust its institutional machinery and also according to the needs and issues of the relevance to the international community, international um, governance, okay, global governance. So according to that, the links between the specialized agencies and the UN are different in scope. Okay, UN has more a management scope, while at the same time the agencies are most focused, has a mandate, has a duty according to some topic or topics. Okay, now we are going to see some of them. Okay, so this different scope is very important because some of the bodies of the United Nations organizations, okay, the ONU, as my colleague mentioned, well, of course, some of those bodies, general bodies, are part of this coordination. For example, the Economic and Social Council, the ECOSOC, okay, which groups them together and has the main coordination links should be highlighted because this coordination among different stakeholders, different of these international organizations, shows the common space and the coordination among the interagency work and interagency approach. which is very important. Of course, we can have a lot of criticisms, a lot of different views about the reality of this, but it's important to remember the theory and the dispositions, okay? Because this is the basis, the legal basis of this structure that we have in a global view. So, according to that, even the General Assembly and, of course, the General Secretariat also have constant links with the authorities of the various agencies. So, the General Secretariat, for example, has coordination with the General Director of the UNESCO, with the general representations or the general directors of different of these international organizations. Of course, they are itself a forum, itself are an organization with different representation, different votes, different right of being here, and of course, different fundings, different decision-making process. Of course, but also should be coordinated or should be on the same wavelength, we can say, with the United Nations approach and view, and of course, mainly principles, very important, like the ones we have in the Charter of San Francisco. So, these constant links between the authorities is part of to view the diagram has made it possible to diversify and focus on by topic or by sector, as well as to strengthen the objectives. Because it's very, very hard and even shows no so much efficient to cover the different topics, the different challenges from the same organization. That's clearly so hard to cope with because one organization and one body, even if you have a lot of employees, even if you have the best experts, it's so hard to structure and organize and manage all by yourself because the world is a lot. Okay, the scope is huge. So, according to that, to separate, to divide, to diversify, to branch out, and also to specialize according different focus perspective, part of the different way to cover the prism is essential to strengthen the objective, the approach, the view. So it's essential to remember those features. Diversification and specialization is essential to understand this United Nations system. And also to understand the classification of them, because of course we have a lot of acronyms in our mind. Okay, IMF, BW, I don't know, UNDP, FAO, UNICEF, UNESCO. We have a lot in our mind, and a lot of time we didn't remember specifically the name of each one. So, considering that, it's important to bear in mind to classify this system, these different agencies, specialized all of them. It's important that we can cover the classification, but by two different ways. The first one, of course, there's a lot of classification criteria. You can go even in the bibliography, you are going to see some of the classification according other criteria, okay? For example, today we are going to cover two of the main ones, but there's many others, okay? Today, the idea to cover this United Nations system is according to and based on the comparison of, first of all, by legal nature. Okay, so the proposal here is oriented towards the legal nature of the entities, and of course, later we are going to cover uh, according to the objectives and purposes by field, okay, or by thematic areas, okay, by the topic, the main aspect they cover, okay, also called mandate of the areas of the entities. So, according to that, by nature, we can distinguish some of the legal structures and the legal organization of some of those organizations. Because sometimes even the name is the same, or it could be very confusing to distinguish them because all should seems part of the United Nations, an agency, an international organization, and that's it. But the scope and the focus, the mandate is not the same. Even the capacity or even the powers, okay, the tools they have to develop their aims or their goals. So according to that, the first one I want to mention is an organism. Okay, it's a specialized entity that has a specific mandate to address a particular area of concern or activity. According to that, organisms may be responsible for implementing programs, providing technical assistance, setting standards, and providing services in their fields or competence. Okay? Some examples, for example, that maybe we
Yeah, but
can
I
think.
in the back.
Sorry?
Instead of me to dry your, spray your clothes to dry, say they struggle to settle better.
I am so
I think
sorry
there's
about what's
some
going on. I
background
don't know.
sound.
So sorry. Let me try to mute everybody again.
Okay,
I did
thank you.
it before, but I'm not sure exactly what's going on. So let's see if that works this time. I muted everybody. I'm gonna unmute just you. Uh, let's see.
Okay,
Okay. All
thank
right.
you,
Sorry
Basil.
about that.
No, no problem. It's part of it. Technology is above us. It's above
Yes.
all of us. Sometimes technology is the thing that rules.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, well, some examples of organisms. For example, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. And you may say, okay, wait, Gonzalo, this is not right. They call organization. It's an organization. No, it's an organism. Now we are going to see an organization and we can compare because sometimes the name is confusing, but we need to be able to distinguish the legal basis, the nature of them. Okay, for example, the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugee, also called UN for Refugees. Okay, so FAO, UNHCR, all of us heard about them. Okay, well, those are organisms, okay? Because the mandate is a specific. They focus on something specific. They don't cover, for example, FAO, of course, has some aspects about environment, but it's not the main purpose. Of course, they can be worried about the local economy, but it's not the main purpose. It's not the mandate. The mandate is food, okay, and also agriculture, rural aspect, countryside points. So the same with refugees. Refugees is part of the migration, but not the whole topic of migration. So refugees, asylum is going to be essential, is going to be very important for the Office of High Commissioner for Refugees, but it's the mandate. We also have some other organization focused on having some programs over the topic of um, migration, but it's not the whole migration in the refugees process. Okay, so organisms focus, okay, specialized in some specific mandate, a specific duty. Okay, well, on the contrary, to compare, of course, we have organizations, okay? An agency that is broader, okay, is larger, a entity considering the organism. That may include agencies, funds, programs, okay? It could be part of a lot of structures in part of the institution. And of course, other components, such as various mandates or objectives. For example, UNESCO. Okay, probably all of us heard about UNESCO. Well, the United Nations for Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. It is an organization. It's not only about science, it's not only about education, it's not only about culture. No, it's coordinated with all the topics, different mandates, a lot of them different approaches, different programs, different work, okay, or different activities. So very important. Also, for example, the World Health Organization, yes, is part of the United Nations system and also have different aims, different aspects because health is such a interconnected topic. It's very transversal, okay? Has a lot of aspects connected, okay? So large entities, organizations, yes? Remember, the name could be confusing, but this is the way we classify them. Okay, a fund. Well, a fund is an entity but so connected to the concept of financial aspects. Okay, funds, money, budget. Okay, that is established to collect and distribute resources for a specific purpose. Funds can finance projects and programs in different areas. Okay, so UNESCO has no some mechanism that real funds has. Okay, for example, sometimes we see, for example, a television advert to raise fund for UNICEF, which is a fund, but UNESCO cannot do that, okay? Or World Health Organization, they can't because it's not the same mechanism. They have some already coordinated funds. The members, the nations members, finance the organizations, but the funds has other mechanisms to be able to finance a project, a program, an activity. So some examples, for example, IFAD, International Fund for Agricultural Development, it's a fund, or UNICEF. Surely all of us know or have listened about UNICEF, United Nations Children's Fund. Okay, important about the tools, the mechanism they have in terms of especially fundraising, and finance management. Okay, a program is an initiative or set of plans. Sometimes a program is itself, sometimes a program could be part of an organization, for example. Okay, so these initiatives or a set of plans and coordinating activities to achieve specific objectives in a given area. Okay, they cover again some specific area. It could be more than one topic, but it should be according to some aims and goal. Okay, and some defined in terms of a project. Okay, the UN programs can address a wide range of issues from sustainable development to public health and education, of course. For example, some ideas, for instance, United Nations Development Program, the UNDP, such as large and important programs, and sometimes we think, okay, it's just another organization. Well, it's an agency, yes, but it's a program, okay, to be more specific. The UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, okay, focus more in environment. Of course, they will have some, in some cases, not overlapping, but covering the same topic. For example, FAO, being an organism, could have some activities, some initiatives, so related, for example, with the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program. And in that case, we have some dispositions to then coordinate the activities, the initiatives, to work together, interagency work. So important. The reality, we can of course question the effectiveness and the real interagency working, the genuine and efficient of those, but that should be the main aspect, okay, the main approach when more than one agency is covering a topic or narrowing another topic, another mandate of another agency. And of course we have autonomous entity. Okay, in this case, an autonomous entity is an organization that has a high degree of independence in decision making, in management, okay, of its activity, but is still linked, okay, a larger agency or an organization is still part of the United Nations. For example, if I mention some ideas in the context of the United Nations, you are going to think about them. For example, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, or the WB, the World Bank. Okay? And you say, okay, yes, we heard about them, of course, and sometimes even seems that they are not part of the United Nations. Okay? And that's actually a problem because IMF and World Bank are part of the United Nations. But sometimes the big problem with the autonomous agencies or the autonomous entities is they work and they focus on a way that should seem related to the principles of the United Nations. And they have to, okay? They are under those principles. For example, the work of the IMF or the work of the World Bank should be coordinated, following, and of course, um, special vigilance, special considering of the special consideration of the principle: peace, safety, development, sustainable development, okay, human rights. All of that should be essential in their activities, okay, because they are under those regulations, under those laws, okay, because they are part of the coordinating the system of the international United Nations. So, of course, we can question that and problematize that, but that is an essential approach when we question the action of the IMF, the World Bank, or any other organization, okay, any other agency, because it's important that they should be coordinating in terms of actions, but also following the values, following the main principles, okay, of the United Nations, the Charter of San Francisco, and many other aspects that were also recognized, signed, okay, and is part of it. So one of the problems with this classification is in certain cases we have or we see hybrids, okay, some mixed entities that have characteristics and feature of several of these, okay, maybe okay a specific mandate organism but has some capacity to get fundraising, so it's a fund, it's an organism, I'm not sure. So considering that, that's the main critics about this classification by legal nature, okay, but it's quite good to know the scope and to understand the tools, the mechanism they have. So we must keep in mind that not all international organizations are part of the United Nations. This is very important because sometimes we confuse United Nations as the world, as the global, and all the international organization coordinating being part or being related with the United Nations. No, indeed not. And very important that some very big organizations, very well known, are not part of the United Nations. For example, the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Okay, focus on commerce, focus on trade. It's not part of the United Nations. It's a very important, it's a global organization, but it's not part of the United Nations. Okay, so not all of that are agencies and not all of the organization. A lot of the regional organization are not part of the United Nations. The Organization of American States, the some other regional organization are not part. Okay, so the coordination is different, and we are going to check the values, the sign international agreements, etc., to really cover the topic. This is important because remember, these classes also focus on implement to incorporate new tools, new mechanism, and a new systematic approach and professional approach to strengthen our analysis, international analysis. Nowadays, we have a lot of international conflicts, a lot of very important international events, and we need to be able to analyze them in a very professional, objective way, okay? To see the culture, the social aspect, the economy aspect, the legal aspect, and of course, political aspect, okay, the international relations analysis, okay. So considering that, we have another classification, and for sure that's is quite known for some of us, okay, which is by field. Okay, it's a classification oriented by field, by sector, thematic, okay, and of course the purpose, the mandate of each of the agencies, okay. So in this case, let's do it maybe a little more interactive. For example, if we speak about health, if we speak about food, I already mentioned some, but considering the list, you can use the chat. What do you think is some of the organization that we put in that classification? Food, health, which of those acronyms, and now we can cover them, okay, are uh, part of it, okay, are part of the health or the food, the feel of them, okay? Remember, you can use the, or you can raise your hand if you want, okay? We have a list and we have the field. Don't be shy.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is an invitation from our SME, Gonzalo Fernandez, as requesting your involvement at this time. We have a list of those abbreviations. Although Emmanuel Asare and Columbus Ngelese raise hands, I would prefer if you allow me to make that suggestion, ladies and gentlemen, that you wait until the end for actual questions, since we
This
have
is
just
more
about
the
15 minutes
activity.
to go. But you may go to the chat box, please,
Yes, please.
and type in your answer or whatever you want to say. The fields out there on your screen: health, food, culture, education, economy, children, migration, labor, tourism, development, equality, environment. And then on the left of your screen,
Excellent. Okay, Columbus already brought to me, and he mentions FAO, okay, FAO, and WHO, which is Food and Agriculture Organization and World Health Organization. Excellent, Columbus. Excellent. Very good. By field, by mandate, okay? So we have those. FAO, WHO, and also we can include WFP, okay, that you see in the list, WFP, which is the World Food Program, okay. Remember, a program, okay, in the agencies, the mechanic is a program, but is focused on world food, okay. About the culture and the education. Okay, I already mentioned that, we know. Of course, the UNESCO, okay? About cultural, scientific, and educational topics, okay? About science. Well, we have education in science, okay? But science in general could be UNESCO, okay? WIPO, science in general, is so connected with what? With inventions, with new names, okay, brands, trademarks, okay, and of course, intellectual property, okay. So WIPO is the World Intellectual Property organization. So part of science, part of education, part of culture. Okay. Oh, excellent question. Steve, as soon as I finish this slide, I'm going to cover your question about the Red Cross. Okay, very good question. Okay, and also we can have, in the case of culture, education, science, the ITU, which is the International Telecommunication Union. Okay, also an agency. Okay, of course, some of them we really know them, but some others are not that common, or we are not sure. Lots of acronyms, very hard to remember the different letters. Okay, so in economy, we have as I mentioned, WB, IMF, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, Okay? How about the IFAD? Because it's also a fund, it's also connected to economy, but the economy of the first sector, okay? International Fund of Agricultural Development, IFAD, okay? Or IFAD, yes? Children, well, for children, you know, we mentioned is a fund, that's a hint, okay? Children, well, children, UNICEF, okay? UNICEF, okay? Children's Fund. Migration, well, I mentioned, I give you a previous mention. Of course, we have the refugee, UN, okay? UN for refugees, which is the UNHCR, and of course we have another one, which is actually more than an agency, is a related organization of the United Nations, which is the IOM, okay? The IOM. Very good, Columbus. You are doing an excellent job today. Very good. Columbus is sending me the different comments about the acronyms. Excellent. IOM. IOM is the International Organization for Migration. Okay, not only refugees, not only asylum, also the situation of general migration. Okay, we have different migrants, different tendencies of migration. So this is more the larger scope of the IOM. In terms of equality, well, we have, of course, UN Women. Okay. This mean, oh, the gender equality or some other aspects of equality and non-discrimination is only in this organization or this agency? No. It could be covered for all of them, okay, when it's a main core, an important value, okay? Remember, interagency, but they are going to focus, they are going to be more specific in aims and goals according to their mandate, okay? And the topic, the field. Labor, work, well, we have ILO. Yes, it's part of the UN, the International Labour Organization. Okay, related to work. Tourism. Oh, it is tourism. Well, it is important. It's also declared as an international a human right, and also it's very important tourism according to the health, okay, the right to rest, the right to have spare time and to enjoy. It's not only about working, it's not only about duties, the life in general, and that's part of the international approach. So we have the UNWTO, okay, it's one of the largest, um, which is the United Nations World Tourism Organization. Okay? Development, such an important topic. We read all the time about it. Okay? Well, as I mentioned, the UNDP is a very important program of about development. Okay, but we also have the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, which is the UNIDO. Okay, environment. Well, of course, we have the WMO. Okay, not very well known, but it is important, which is the World Meteorological Organization, because meteorology, climate is so related to the nowadays aspect of the environment, the global warming, the climate change. Okay. And as I mentioned before, the UNEP, okay, about environment program. Yes, so we have a lot of them, yes, and we classify differently. That's indeed important, okay? About, well, Steve mentioned a question that I'm going to cover, which is very good because we tend to have these kind of confusions, which is how will the Red Cross fit in this scheme, okay, in this diagram? Well, the Red Cross is not an international organization, okay? It's not an intergovernmental organization. It's an NGO, an international NGO. Okay, what we tend to call international solidarity, because sometimes it's not an NGO, or we can consider Greenpeace, we can consider International Amnesty, we can consider others, okay, for example, Doctors Without Borders, or some others that we we are not sure, or maybe we are not sure if it's United Nations. No, this is international solidarity, international NGOs, international non-governmental and sometimes even non-profits work to help, okay, to cover some of the gaps, some of the deficiencies, and some of the problem with the essentially the local context, okay, like in the Mediterranean crisis, in the refugees crisis, in the war crisis, okay. So according to that, is an extra stakeholder, is a new and very important actor, very important stakeholder or subject in the international relations nowadays, but is not an intergovernmental organization, which is the mainly definition. It could be intergovernmental or supranational, but it's not the main definition of an international organization itself. Okay, very good. Okay, concluding remarks, because time is a lot. We have to deal with time. Okay, some concluding remarks that I want you to bear in mind to consider this topic. This is a huge aspect. Of course, this is a lot of information, a lot of acronyms, so don't run away. But it's important to understand the diagram designed for the United Nations system of international organization, international agencies, allows us to illustrate the institutional framework and how the international communities is operationalized, okay, instrumentalized, materialized, okay. Of course, again, UN is not all the world, but UN is a very good example of how the global governance is instrumentalized, okay, is created, okay, has form, okay. So show exactly the current dynamics of the global governance, okay. When we have some differences between one forum and the other, actions that should be not coordinated, well, we need to be to have a real fundament, very justified view over those situations, because it's happening. Diversification and specialization, again, are the key features to understand this diagram, okay. So it's not a lot of international relations all separated, all divided. No, they tend, a lot of them are coordinated or even are part of a system, okay. So important, okay. So the key features of this diagram are diversification and specializations, and of course exemplify also some of the critics that we already covered, which is the problems of the massiveness in the decision making, the problems in the representation, the bureaucratic frustration, diffusion, okay, in some spaces that are part of inefficiency in terms of international cooperation. So this actually is a very good feature, but also is a very critical aspect, okay, that we actually critique, because also was used, and it's being used to to create obstacles in the work of and the main aspects of the international and the global governance, okay. So it's part of it. Of course, we have a huge topic, so as always I recommend to some bibliography to broaden, to go deeper. Any of you that are interested, this is recommended bibliography to go deeper, to know more different information, because one class is very hard to cover all, okay. Thank you for your time, and of course, if we have any comments, any doubts, or any aspects, please feel free to present them. Thank you.
It's a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, Gonzalo Fernandez. Pretty much like you just stated, the United Nations organizations is so big, so large that there is no way you could have covered everything in just one session. But you've done your very best, including the practicum session that we have, which gained the participation of everybody. Well, not everybody, but most of the attendees. You've done an excellent job. Thank you very, very much. I hope you get the picture, ladies and gentlemen, and from this point, you should also be considered experts in the arena of the organization. We don't have too much time. Some of it to question coming Adebola Ismail.
Yeah, good morning, sir.
Good
Hello?
morning.
Yeah, we don't have too much time. Let's go to the question quick, please.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Good morning, the presenter. Yeah, this is my question. In the context of a pandemic, how could WHO, which is a World Health Organization,
And
FAO, which is Food and Agriculture Organization, and the World Bank collaborate more effectively to address both health and economic recovery simultaneously?
a beautiful question. Thank you very much, Ismail.
Yes, of course. Of course, the pandemic, the COVID situation was a global challenge indeed, and it was very immediate to create countermeasures, okay, counter um, mechanisms and decisions to deal with that. So they were compelled, they were forced, of course, their agencies should and must and have to work in an interagency approach because couldn't we cover the whole situation essentially and mainly in the development countries, okay, the countries for development in the process of developing, couldn't be covered without the economic aspect. So we need some of them requires of course financial and credit according to the new measures that should be implementing for the recommendation of the health. But of course, we can consider health without food, without a more efficient rural area and primary sector. Well, no. So the interagency work should be, and it was indeed very important. It's those that approach, that analysis, it's not in the whole world. They don't work the same in the whole world. We have, of course, defined some specific areas, okay? And according to that, some regions were more focused on that, and some others, we have other approaches. Okay, for example, in some countries in the north, the WIPO, the international, the intellectual property, was very important to cover the crisis about the patents, about the trademarks, because there was such a problem in terms of okay, no access. No, this is a very important moment, and even in the intellectual property law, we have to consider to open and to make accessible because the health important, the vital principle of life. So this is part of the context, okay? The situation, the current situation requires a new implementation, and it was in some cases good, efficient, but of course it's not the whole analysis because we have some other lack of participation, coordination, activities on the contrary, etc. And that shows some lack of efficiency.